This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV, it's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast. I'm really happy to host Tremaine Wills coming out of Virginia. She is a financial coach, financial planner. She's an author and a speaker about financial literacy. So if you are in the audience and have questions about debt, how to pay it off, investing, budgets, today's guest, Tremaine, is all about that, and I'm really happy to have her on to pick her brain and add value to the audience. So, Tremaine, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Briefly introduce yourself, and we'll dive into the work that you do.
Yes, as you mentioned, I'm a financial planner. Oh, I guess this intro could go on forever, but the core of what I do is really helping people get control of their finances and alleviate financial stress. I love creating solutions for people where they can start to see their way out of any stress or overwhelm that they might be feeling and really have a solid roadmap to follow. So that's how I got started in this work, is just helping people lift that burden and feel ease and confidence around their money.
Oh, interesting. And starting it out, what's the number one problem people come to you for? Is it taxes or investment or savings? And how do you help them with that problem?
Yeah, so I would say the number one problem is overspending, where people are making great money, but they have high levels of debt and they just can't see a way out of it. And the primary way that we help people get out of it is to give folks connection to their purpose, to their vision, to what they want to accomplish. So that way, when we work together to create a budget or a roadmap, there's some meaning behind why you're spending less, and it doesn't feel like a jail sentence, right? Like somebody's like telling you all these things you can't do, but instead it's, oh, I know why I'm staying within this amount, because my goal is to do something that's much more important than whatever I was spending money on in the past. So that's the biggest thing, is really helping people get off of this hamster wheel of the money's coming in, and as quickly as it's coming in, it's going back out. But instead, really assigning jobs to those dollars so they can reach whatever goals they have for their life.
Interesting. And the conversation can go so many different directions. I try to make it a niche, and a lot of what I've talked to a lot of financial planners, some of them focus on minorities, or some of them focus on the no children. I think they call them the dinks, low income, no children. So what are you, do certain people come to you, and what sort of problems do they struggle with for the audience?
Yeah, so I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. So people who are business owners that they got big vision, but they may not truly understand how to make the financials work for where they want to go. And they really just don't want to continue working until typical retirement age. So the goal is, how do we build this thing? How do we pull the money out of it so that way we can stop working as quickly as possible?
Interesting. Yeah, and in that light, what's really, because I was having lunch with one of my friends, he's an entrepreneur, and he was talking about this problem that he had in his early phases of his company, and he was talking about, the company was making great money month over month, and then come time for taxes, the company was profitable, but when I come to pay taxes, I don't have money to pay my taxes or my employees. What is happening there?
Yeah, that's common. A lot of people, sometimes I see clients that are using their bank account as evidence of profitability, but they're not paying taxes throughout the year. And that is a very tricky situation, especially once you get into multiple six figures and seven figures in revenue. The bank balance is not a good indicator of financial health. So, making sure that you do have those financial statements and are truly aware of what your actual profit margins are, getting on top of taxes before the filing deadline, all of that is going to make sure that you're not surprised what happens when it's time to file those forms.
The other question, a lot of, and I'm not sure if you help entrepreneurs with this, but when should entrepreneurs bootstrap versus take funding for either from angel or venture capital or that go that route?
Yeah. So that's a great question. Of course, the answer is always going to be it depends. But this really boils down to, of course, knowing your numbers and understanding the value of the business that you have. Any investor is going to want to know what's in it for me. When can I get this money back and how much money can I make? And so for many entrepreneurs, if we haven't sat down to do the numbers to identify if I take 250, $500,000, what is going to be that return and what am I going to do with that money? And how much equity do I give up for that much? And you have to know what your business is worth in order to dictate what a reasonable amount is. And for many of us, we don't know those numbers. So it's not easy to decide, should I take equity? Should I give up a particular amount of equity in order to scale the business? Many of us probably should sit down and have some sort of business valuation done, understanding what assets are inside of our business, whether that's intellectual property or any data that we have that can truly help us see, what is this thing really worth that I'm building beyond just the revenue that's coming in.
And then along those lines, when should a entrepreneur decide to, like, for example, if they get a offer from like private equity or they get a buyout offer, or whether or not they should stick with it, maybe take their company public or just do the solo grind? What factors come into play in those decisions?
Yeah, you got to know the numbers, right? Sometimes we don't think about the exit. So for me, when I'm talking to clients about exiting, it's okay, how much would you be willing to sell this thing for? And if somebody puts an offer on the table that is that amount, are you truly going to give it up? For some entrepreneurs, there's I will never sell, and that's because you don't know what the number is. But depending on how well you build your business, if somebody approaches you and they're like, hey, I want to give you 10, $20 million for this thing. And if your number was 17, that means it's time to hang it up, right? But it really goes back to knowing what the goal is, what the purpose of building the business was. Because I've been approached to sell my company and I'm like, that number wasn't high enough. So there is a number, but it's just whatever number I was approached with, it wasn't good enough. And for a business owner, you need to know what those numbers are so you can make accurate and informed decisions. So I would say that many of us really just need to sit down and identify, what is my exit strategy? Am I building this to sell? Am I building it so that it's a model that can be franchised? What are you doing with this thing? So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it reminds me, like, if Netflix were bought by Blockbuster, what would it be today?
Yes.
Or Instagram, like Instagram, all these various companies. The next question I have for you is, what in this, especially because I talked to my tax accountant last year, just because after Trump was elected, I wanted to see what questions are you getting based on, like, the change, we got a different president, but these policies are completely different than anything we've seen. So what questions are clients coming to you in this aspect or regard for the upcoming tax season?
Yeah. So really just trying to understand what incentives are still in place, what deductions they still can get, what credits are in place. And yes, we have a new president, but the laws don't change that fast, right? So many of the things that were in place, even from Trump's first presidency, are still there. So we can still take advantage of some of those incentives. But what we really should be doing is tax planning so that when some of these incentives do run out and are going to be replaced by something else, we are prepared. For lots of clients, we're really talking about making sure that we have enough cash in our business so that way we can mitigate any changes that might arise, especially for folks who are doing like government contracting and things like that. Like the landscape is different. So that's the biggest thing that I'm talking to clients about is really leaning into tax planning and not waiting until the tax year is done and then not having very many options for what we're able to do to reduce that tax bill.
Interesting. Another question is this idea that, because, for example, a lot of doctors and med students, they come out of med school a couple $100,000 in debt, and a lot of them, they just, yeah, I got to pay this debt off. And some of them were like, yeah, if I pay 3-4% interest, but I make 10-20% if I invest it. So should you pay off debt before you start investing, or should you do it simultaneously? What are your thoughts?
That is a great question. So I like to refer people back to the math, right? If the interest is only even 6 or 7%, if I can make 10%, then I'm going to put my money where I can make 10%, right? So it all goes back to the type of debt that we have and the interest rate on the debt. So when we're working with clients and we're building the debt payoff strategy, there are some debts that we are going to say, hey, you need to attack this aggressively, right? Your credit cards, your personal loans, anything that got double-digit interest, we're going to pay that off quickly. But we're not going to neglect investing. Everybody should be investing along the way. Just how much capital you have available to do that is going to be limited because you have a debt service. We are always telling clients, invest, right? But how aggressive you can be is dictated by what kind of debt you have. Our answer is you got to do both. But in the approach, we're being strategic about what do the numbers say? Not how your feelings and I don't want to owe anybody anything. If that interest is 5%, you better hang on to that. You hang on to that debt and you invest the rest so that you can get that higher return. Because the thing about investing in this is time is our friend so that the interest can compound and we can accumulate that wealth. But if you delay until you are completely debt free, depending on what that balance is, and if we're talking about owing hundreds of thousands of dollars, that could be years before you're actually in a position to really start investing. So our advice is do both and prioritize that higher interest debt to get that paid off faster. But if it's low, hang on to that and take advantage of the leverage.
Yeah. I'm the same camp, and I wrote an article, and it's amazing how differently the physician community thinks, and I think it's just like this risk aversion, but
Yeah.
a lot of them were like, some of them were like $500,000 in debt, and they're like, yeah, I got to chop off some of this debt so I don't have money to invest. But then I'm like, if you're going to come out of $500,000, how long is that going to take you to pay off? And if you're waiting 10 years before you start investing, you're 10 years behind, and
Mm-hmm.
all that money hasn't you compounded and growing. So you're even more behind that now. The other question is, you talk about sinking funds, and what are they and why are they crucial for your financial journey?
Yeah. So sinking funds are a strategy to address expenses that are not monthly or frequent. And so when you are building out a budget, oftentimes most people are paid either biweekly, twice a month, or once a month. And that's typically how our bills are coming as well. But if we have an opportunity to pay something like property taxes or even to get our insurance at an annual rate, oftentimes we can save money if we paid annually instead of monthly. But if you set up a sinking fund where you're putting money aside every month for a particular expense, then you're paying that bill, but the money's just going into your savings account until it's time to cover that expense at whatever the frequency is that you've selected. So we encourage sinking funds so that way when you come up to expenses that are abnormal, it is not such a blow to your budget where you now have, this off balance budget. You're like, oh man, I was doing so great. I got this big bill I wasn't expecting. So planning for those kinds of things helps to keep the routine of budgeting in order, but also allows you to take advantage of discounts when they present themselves. Because oftentimes you can pay for things annually and save. It's a common strategy for subscription models.
Yeah. Yeah, and that probably that answers the question why my colleague basically he didn't have a sinking fund. He was basically money in, money out, and then so by the time like big expenses like taxes or things like that, he was like, "Where did all the money go? We're profitable." And I know people that hedge because every year everything gets more and more expensive, so they have a investment fund where they invest in the equities so that when they have to pay it, they still come out with a profit. Something to think about. How can people learn more about you and reach out to you and connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm like Visa, I'm everywhere on social media. My handle is at Tremaine Wills. And then if you'd like to know what services we offer, you can visit us at www.mindovermoney.net.
Yeah, excellent. And thanks so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom and expertise. And keep up the great work.
Yeah, thanks for having me.